Awesome. It is February 27th, 2024. WordPress 6.5 beta 3 just landed. But we are not here to talk necessarily about 6.5. We're here to talk about a post I wrote that normally I probably would have posted this on Make Core back when I was running the outreach program, but it just didn't seem like there was a good spot for it. And it got some good traction, and folks seem to want to chat more about it and have more of a synchronous dialogue. So at a high level, the post goes through what I think of as like overlapping problems across the experience, both in terms of like high level um, things that our users run into collectively. I can sometimes get really into the weeds with different bugs, and this was kind of a moment where I was zooming out and thinking about the entire experience from what I read and interactions with folks using the site editor, and also personal experience talking with folks. So at a high level, the areas that I roughly identify, which I in the post encourage folks to share anything that comes to mind for them, is changing something across your entire site or just for one block, seeing where items are used across the experience. So whether you're like updating a pattern and you want to see where else it's in place, a sync pattern, that's a good example. Pervasive inconsistencies. I use the example, this is kind of a little bit lazy, but of icons. But this comes up with modals, it comes up with lots of different things. But you can see here the same icon is used to describe a couple different interfaces. Understanding inherited values and options. This comes up in a few different ways, whether it's with kind of inherited styles or talking about a pattern with overrides. It's kind of showing basically different ways in which something you're looking at comes from somewhere else. And that's something that I feel like we need to do a better job of. And then understanding what you can and can't edit. And then I kind of think about phase 3 with this. And I'm going to stop sharing so I can see your beautiful faces. So that's the high level overview of kind of the post, the general areas. And I assume if you haven't read it, quickly speed read it, drag and copy paste it, put in an AI, have it describe it for you in a paragraph. But I would love to turn the floor to you all at this point and just kind of see what people have to say, starting with Brian Gardner. I love that you raised your hand.
Zoom professional, right? And I'm just gonna drop this just because I literally got off an hour and a half call with Kevin Geary and Jonathan Denwood at WP Tonic, some of which were on the some of y'all were on the call here, or also we're also on that call. I think what we're seeing, and a lot of what you pointed out, Anne, is something that I think we really need to pay attention to, kind of moving forward. At least the next couple of versions is to stop adding new things and to fix. And and I know there's a lot of work, Rich. You've done a ton on workflow and just making like the existing features and options and settings that are there. So I would just love to see a lot of work, or most work at least. It's easy to say, oh, we want it to do this, but like if you bring in a feature that's inconsistent, then you're causing yet another problem. So just kind of a call to, rallying around like making what we have already better and consistent and easy to identify and work and document and educate.
Yeah, no, I will briefly say that some of these, I always find it, I think being so close to the work, it feels conflicting to hear stop working on everything and also make sure that you fix all this stuff because it's like they're acting in opposition. But I understand what you're saying of like taking time to focus on polish. And I do think a lot of this, we have focused on polish, but I think where we're at right now is these are like the thorniest problems. That's why I titled it overlapping, is they're not um super easy to fix. And like, I don't know, Matthias, if you want to talk to that, but that's just, I'll briefly mention that as like reflecting on this post and the intent of the post. It's like these are thorny, these are high level, they kind of cascade down, they overlap with other problems. And so it's hard to just kind of dig in and say like, we'll fix this one, if that makes sense. Mike, I see you have your, yeah, if people can do the hand raising, that's actually like really helpful.
Yeah, cool. First of all, thanks for putting this chat on. Hugely important. Awesome. Love these chats. Unfortunately, I'm kind of also in listening mode today. I'm on baby duty, but I was in that same chat with Brian just a few minutes ago on the other podcast and listening to kind of that perspective from Kevin and his world. I just want to put out there, and this kind of overlaps with everything. It's kind of a big picture thing, but there's a sentiment that I kept seeing in the comments that like they're not listening to us. And whether that's perception or their experience or whatever, I think that is very important for us to carry that and to kind of acknowledge it. And doing things like this helps chip away at that. But also just kind of acknowledging being okay with acknowledging some of our shortcomings and understanding those things. Because that's, I think, I don't know, there's where we're at with the reality of block editor, and like some people's perceptions are not equal right now. And if we can kind of get the perceptions matching where we're at with reality, which is in a great spot, and refining those things down that we're talking about, I think we'll be in a much better spot. But I just wanted to throw that idea out there in terms of kind of the stuff we're hearing from that side. And there are a lot of great ideas coming from there. You know, I know Kevin particularly is in his own like bricks world, but there are some concepts of problems that he's dealing with that are relevant to us that we're going to run into eventually anyway. So anyway, just a big idea to throw out there. Thanks again for having this call.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I actually found it fascinating to see my posts being presented as, or other people reacting to it as if I were not a part of helping with the site editor, which I think is, I almost did like too good of a job of like, I don't know, being super critical because I'm just so close to it. But yeah, I think that to me was like a fun like Easter egg or something, where I was like, wow, like I was able to speak to this so much that people really feel this and they're like, yeah, I've been saying this. Yeah, this is what it feels like. So I see that as like a good thing. And that I hope folks who are watching this or anyone who read the post like knows that it came from a place of hearing this stuff and wanting to reflect it back. So consider it. I want to also mention now that there is an outreach. The FSC outreach program or experiment has changed to just outreach and make Slack. And I really encourage folks to join that. This is a new change and a recent change. And I'm really excited about it. There's three people now who are going to be managing that. So like it was just me before. Now we got three people. It's going to be like awesome. I'm so excited about it. And I just really encourage folks to jump in there if they want to like talk about this stuff outside of this. And I know some folks on, I'm not on X, Twitter, but I know some folks were asking like, where can I share feedback? Where can we get involved in this? Like people aren't listening and that's a great spot to go. So I just want to address that part of what you said as well. Damon, do you want to say this or do you want me to read it? I can happily read it. I'll read it. So Damon said in the chat, I hear a lot of the community say stop and focus on fixing things. And I get that. I get the word stop makes some feel awkward. I don't think most are asking for a hard stop, but mostly decreasing cadence of new features and planning on polish a bit, which yeah, that makes sense. What else is coming up for folks? If not, we can also dive into kind of some of the practicalities too. Yeah, Jordan.
Yeah, so two thoughts that I have from looking at reading the post and in general. I think that right now we have this like very inconsistent visual language inside WordPress core. And that's basically caused by the fact that we have three different UIs that are WordPress core. We're in this very awkward in between where the editor is very mature. It is, like so much easier and better to use than it was 5 years ago, but it hasn't completely taken over core, and so like the visual language is split. I've been spent the last month working on a feature that literally is going to be possible to do the same thing in the WordPress UI that's been around. Crazy Horse was 2.7, the customizer, which was like 3-ish, 3.4, I think. I don't remember. And inside the editor as well. And so like it's three different ways and trying to keep them all aligned, even small things like keeping the correct casing of words can be difficult there, let alone having a single visual language. Your post pointed out the icons, and now I can't unsee that. So thank you. But I think that like that is part of it, is trying to like really finalize like that visual language. I also worry that in some ways we've gotten away from decisions, not options. And, in part because, you know, the editor opens up so many more possibilities. And I wonder if, part of the solution here is, one along the lines of what Matthias wrote about having blocks that are not, that are maintained to the standards that Gutenberg requires, but are not, shipped by default, and, more things there. And like, you can start with blocks, but that could also be additional block settings as well. And so like, if you really pare down a block to its, most minimal, for example, like the query block is, I think, a great example of this, where like it is, out of the box, it solves about 80% of people's needs. It's fantastic, but, that last 20% can and should be solved by plugins. And ideally, canonical plugins, play a role in this. And I think that is, partially in seeing the head shaking, where this is going. So, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to briefly show that proposal just in case folks haven't seen this, because I think it is a really, oh, I should emoji erect with all of it. I think this is something that we definitely should, is part of the solution to this and part of something I'm excited about going forward. I don't know, Matthias, if you want to talk about this, but yeah, I definitely encourage folks to check it out, and I'll include it in the notes.
Oh, I also want to, well, hello everyone. It's great to see all this group assemble. I just wanted to touch briefly on what you mentioned about the like what's the saying, like be your own worst critic. I feel like we're like, and especially like you and I, and like we're like constantly talking about like all these frustrations and how we can like overcome them. So it's like very much like it has been like an active area of work for a long time. Even like in a sense, I still feel like so many frustrations even just with the writing editor. And I agree, it's in a way better place. I prefer it over like many other things in comparison. But there's like still like last week we were going over like a few micro interactions that are like just a little bit off, and that we need to like really square them up and so forth. And there is space to do all of those things. I think that's the, and maybe some of that is like it gets lost in the, especially with when we do like big WordPress releases. We're coming up with another one, and it's like all the flagship things are like, yeah, the new features and so forth, user facing and so on. But there's still like I think like an immense amount of just like trying to both like address bugs and address these like usability frustrations. I know I'm the first one that I wish like we would be moving way faster with many of these things. Some are just like when we talk about like, I don't know, something like navigation, like the navigation block or how to create menus, has been like a painful thing on WordPress for like since the introduction of menus. Like the moment that we went from like, okay, from one-to-one parity between pages and menus just opens up so many complexities for users. And it's so hard to like get it right. I don't think we're like quite there. I think like we still need a bunch of work. Sometimes I think the solutions are not, you need some steps to happen before you land on the right solution. And sometimes I feel like those steps might feel like working on new features. But I think, for example, like patterns, which is a big thing, and there were like some mentions on the Twitter threads about like, let's get patterns right. Getting pattern right, if we trace back all the roadmap for patterns, it's like there's a ton of things that feel like features. And I think it takes some time for those things to settle onto like the right abstractions, the right primitives, the right usability flows. And that's it has to be like an active part of the work. When we talk about the how do you determine what you're applying is global or local, and how you do it on styles, like we've known about this problem for some time. I feel like we haven't quite figured out like a good design solution for them, even the ones that we currently have on issues with like showing them like on purple and so forth. It is so easy for that to become it kind of solves some of the issue. Yeah, now it's like a bit more visible what is there, but it's also sort of like hitting users directly in the face with like the complexity of the system. So how do we balance the, yeah, like maybe like an experienced site builder would say, no, this is like the perfect solution. It makes it easy for me, but it may like create or throw a wrench into the how like an end user might interact with that. And that to me is like the biggest, it's both like the most rewarding and the biggest challenge of working in WordPress. It's just the wide diversity of use cases, from extremely novice people that are coming online just want to express ideas, all the way to very complicated enterprise solutions that need very sophisticated and robust solutions that are easy to maintain, easy to scale, and so forth. I am absolutely convinced we can create a tool that does all of these things, but it's going to be like we're going to make, as we're caught sort of in the middle of it, I feel like we're going to sometimes optimize slightly too much in one direction and self-correct a little bit. So it's like, I think like a constant progress of finding those boundaries. So that's sort of like where I'm coming from. I think like all of these, I take to heart all of this feedback. I feel it the same way. And it's also in some cases that I was also asking for, like, if we have examples across the community or comparing with other page builders within or outside of WordPress, like other CMSs out there, that they have arrived at things that we feel like, oh, this is a better solution than what we have, let's bring them up. Like we're always looking for the, like, if there's an example of like DCMS is doing menu management in a very intuitive way while at the same time scaling to all the very complex needs that we have. Yeah, we should be like absolutely open to to finding those things and what are the right abstractions and right solutions. Sorry, I became a bit rambly. There's a couple hands raised.
Yeah, I think Fabian, you were first. Is that right? I feel like, yeah. Okay, Fabian, then Carolina, you next.
Yeah, I think one of the things that also came up last week in the outreach hallway hangout that we had there is one of the reasons why I think we're struggling a bit with kind of that perception of folks asking for kind of a stop and hey, let's get some things right, is that kind of in the history of WordPress earlier on, we used to have that concept of merge proposals and kind of a more rigid process of what it means for a feature to actually get accepted into core. And we still, to an extent, have that for some features that actually use the experimental flag in the Gutenberg plugin, where we can do a lot of that incremental exploration and update flow on those experimental features that sometimes stay in the plugin for a longer time. But for a lot of the JavaScript-based features, like all of the things that were rolled out over the years in the site editor, or one example that always comes to mind for me is content-only locking. Some of those things ever behind an experimental flag, they were just merged and using content only to kind of pick on here. Content only was merged a week before the beta of a WordPress release. There was no real testing done in the Gutenberg plugin. And then it shipped, and it's been 5 iterations of WordPress releases where we've just not spent the time to go back to the feature to iterate on some of the things that we've done because other priorities came up. And so one of the things that always comes to mind for me is whether there is some way for us to kind of have these bi-weekly Gutenberg releases, which is incredibly cool, and we're shipping more features in every single Gutenberg release than maybe we did in entire WordPress releases back in the day. But it feels like those Gutenberg releases and WordPress core releases kind of don't talk to one another, and it's kind of, hey, happenstance, oh, well, 3 months over, we need to ship whatever is in here at this current state right now into core. And I don't think there is a well-defined process for what it actually means to get something to merge into the Gutenberg plugin. Some contributors have essentially the mindset of, hey, let's just iterate quickly and kind of get this in and we can fix it later, which is great and which I love for the Gutenberg plugin. It makes it super hard at the time when we kind of get to the next WordPress release. And now we have those half-baked features that are now making their way into core because they're baked in with all the other things. And I'm wondering whether we can address what I feel like is the heart of the issue, why some of those sometimes half-baked, sometimes not half-baked features are ending up in WordPress core itself, whether we can address that on the actual, what it means to merge something in Gutenberg.
I have some points to talk about that, but I think like Carolina like has her hand first.
No, I would actually really like to hear your reply, Matthias. So you can go ahead.
Okay. Well, I think there's definitely something to it. I think that the balance between being able to have a space where we can like move and iterate fast and gather like again, the Gutenberg plugin doesn't have like that much reach on its own, but it's like it runs in a few places. Like .com still like runs it like mostly in production for the most part. I think that provides a very interesting feedback loop for user testing before we hit major WordPress releases. So I'm pretty happy with that channel. I agree that there's some like tensions and sometimes like we accumulate things and then we get this bottleneck of the release. We're having some of that now with like the font library discussions as well. So it is, I certainly see some of those frictions. I think the content only is a great example of maybe how we communicate this work because content only was really a component of a much bigger roadmap in allowing us to get to the point where we can do these sort of block patterns that have the content is localized for each instance, but the design can be changed, which was the biggest like user request from especially more advanced use cases for being able to use patterns. Otherwise, people felt like we either have it like completely synchronized and I cannot really like use it as a pattern, or it becomes like an instance. And then if I change the design, I need to go through all the pages and update all these, like a very real, tangible pain point. So content only was like finding like one small step to get us in that direction. And the idea was to try to introduce it without any UI implications. So you wouldn't be able to create them on the UI. It was like done in the code of the patterns and so forth. I think we're going to get some of those, maybe not always right. I personally think like content only was the like maybe was left in that state for a bit too long, but it was instrumental to what we're now getting with like pattern overrides and even some of the custom field work that we're doing. It would be really hard to like keep it boxed out entirely without like having some of these back and forth. Um, but at the same time, I think like we also need to the whole locking system. I think needs like some refinements as well in what happens on the interface itself. But it's like I don't see it as an isolated feature, that one specifically. It's more like a building block towards this sort of system that we're like just now getting to sort of realize. It's one area where I feel like it can address so many problems that people have bring up in terms of, oh, like patterns are just frustrating to use because you have this binary choice. And I think we can like this is a, but it's an aspect of the whole feature, if that makes sense.
I'll quickly add that I think this also touches on something that there is like we're placing seeds in the ground to grow for future releases. And like block hooks, for example, being added in 6.4, but 6.5 is actually where you can add, block hooks to modify content, which is huge. And so that's kind of the progressional stuff that I feel like sometimes happens where, yeah, there's like a cultural tension there of waiting until it's perfect versus planting seeds and having it mature that I think we regularly come into tension with. So yeah, Carolina, I want to give you the stage.
Mhm. Okay, well, great discussion so far. So thank everyone for that. And I think this type of meeting is incredibly important because when we talk about communication, it's of course not only within the people who contribute to WordPress core or Gutenberg, it's of course to all the extenders, also including those people here today. I think that we need to, as contributors, we need to be more transparent about the problems that we are actually saying, right, we are struggling with creating an interface that works for everyone. And I think that when we make decisions, including about which features goes into a release, but also things like, oh, we removed a button, we need to document the reasons why much better. And we need to have complete descriptions in our Gutenberg issues and our pull requests. And we need to bring the issues to the same level that we would do for a core track ticket, right? So not just 2 sentences about a discussion that happened between 2 or 3 people. We need to have much better transparency and documentation about why, because then we can again refer back to that. And especially historically, like, but in 3 releases ago, we decided to move the position of this button, and now we're actually moving it again, or we are completely deleting it or moving it to a different part of the interface that makes it difficult to find. Because I think that can reduce some of the friction. But also, I don't think that it's only about feature fatigue that we are introducing new features. It is about the interface. Because when you work with something for a couple of WordPress releases, if you work with WordPress on a daily basis, for example, of course you get used to the UI very quickly. So when we do change the UI, we might think that we are improving something, but for some users, it just makes it more difficult because they have to relearn and relearn and relearn. And also when we do change the UI for brand new users, the UI is no longer going to match our documentation, right? So we have to be I think that we have to be a little bit more careful with our UI changes and not only rely on our personal opinions. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was smiling, laughing because I was reading the comments that says, I feel seen. Okay, great. You think that if we are going to make UI decisions, we need to have, even if we can't have user testing or A/B testing for everything, we need to have a little bit more. We need to know why we're making the decision, right? It needs to be because we have an increase of support tickets about this particular feature being difficult. And here are the links. You can go and read what the users are saying, for example. And yeah, that was.
Hang on. I would love to see
that's
hosts
what was
more
on
involved.
my mind.
Yeah, I would love to see hosts more involved in giving exactly that feedback, because that is something I feel like I have to redirect people a lot with, which some of it is like finding the GitHub issues and all that sort of stuff. But I'll just do my general plug of like, if you don't have time to see if the issue is already open, we do have folks who do triage who will close out the issue even if it's already been open, and like please share. Because that's a huge way that we can get feedback, especially if you're in an agency or you work in support or whatever it is. It's something that I think we all can hopefully feel more empowered to do that, and to share as much as possible. I think this new outreach handle will be really helpful. So for anyone who's actually a contributor in WordPress, I want to note that there is going to be in GitHub, you can tag this outreach group and it will ping a group of people who have opted into offering feedback and testing things. So please use that. It's very similar to the Flock Themers group tag, where if you have something impacting block themers, there's a group of folks who have opted in. So maybe we need to have more of those to help get more feedback directly, but I just want to plug that. And then Nick, please, your turn.
Yeah, my comment was a bit backtracking us a little bit. But I do think that there's a bit of a marketing issue around new features, quote unquote. Interactivity is a great one. I've heard some comments like, why are we working on this when there's other problems? Like, but the interactivity API is like a foundational component for a lot of blocks now in core. Like navigation links and, images and everything like that. So like it's a new feature, but it's not just the interactivity API in and of itself. It's informing the way that a lot of core is being built. So I think it's like one thing with like a lot of these new features, it's not the feature in and of itself. It's how it connects to core. And I think making sure that message is told is important, not to like defend the criticism. But it also is important for people to understand like how these things are built up over time. Then my second thought was around, because we're talking about overlapping issues in the site editor. And I think it's like important, and I don't know how to convey this properly, but I mean, the site editor is in a transitional phase, right? I mean, where we want to get to the site editor is not where we are currently. And I think that we have a lot of people using the site editor that are brand new users. My parents have a little website and they've started using the site editor. have no background in the websites, all the way up to like designers who are, folks in this room who are like really trying to use it as a design tool. And I think that that's inherently we're going to run into problems there. And just to share an overlapping issue for everyone to think about is around how content is managed. And when I think back to like I say old WordPress, I shouldn't say that, but old WordPress, like when you create a page, when you trash the page, right, it goes into the trash and then you can delete it permanently, right? It's like this for, again, I'm going to base all my comments on my father, who's not very technical savvy. He understands that. Okay, you trash it, it goes into your trash. Oh, I made a mistake. I can bring that back. It's a very logical flow. It's very similar to other applications like your computer. You trash something, you bring it out of the trash. One of the biggest issues I see, and it's like in the site editor, is around how changes that you make are preserved to prevent people from making mistakes. And this seems like such a small little thing, but I watched him delete a template that had been customized, and there was no way to get it back easily. And then I watched him click and clear customizations, and everything was gone. And he was like, wait, what's happening? So when we talk about like overlapping problems, I think like this is an area where one, it would help designers because they could get their changes back. But it's also like very important that like when new users use the site editor, it feels safe because it already doesn't feel safe because you can change so much. Like I love the power of that, but it is a little bit scary for new people going in there to be like, oh, did I do something wrong? So I think that this is something that we can, obviously the interface is going to change. There's a lot more coming to the site editor, but I think this should be like a founding principle that we keep an eye on because there is a fear that I have seen of people using the site editor and potentially making a mistake. Taking away that fear, I think will help adoption and alleviate a lot of some of these other issues. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, I love the use case with the parents. I get phone calls from my dad pretty frequently too. Chris.
Yo, yeah, I wanted to kind of, I guess, give a little context and also a shout out to the last couple comments. But like I've been quiet on this call because my experience with the site editor is a lot broader in that like so I work at Pantheon, which is a host. We don't necessarily get tickets, or at least they don't come to me um, about the editor experience because that's a WordPress thing, so it's not a thing that we would necessarily support, but I know for a fact that our customers aren't going to go open a GitHub issue. Um, and what we do see is a lot of people using Divi or Beaver or all the other page builders. And I think that's more a matter of like familiarity. But my personal experience, like every release or every other release or whatever, I try to go through and say like, okay, did something change? And I'm going to try to do the new thing and like poke around. So I am like looking at the site editor or Gutenberg or whatever every release cycle-ish. And it's not easy for me. I've been using WordPress for like 16, 17 years. I'm a developer and I use it on I use the site editor on my personal site and it feels difficult for me to do things. And if it's difficult for me, and so my comment is just super broad. It's like if it's hard for me to do a thing that I want to do to make my site or make a customization in a particular way, then I can't possibly expect someone who is less experienced with WordPress to be able to do that thing. And that's sort of just like zooming way out. Like my overall impression is like, yikes. Like I don't know that I want to recommend people to do this and like customize their site in this way, but I can't in good faith really do that. And it like feels bad, you know? And I like Jordan, your comment about like having multiple different interfaces, like that's like yes, like it's not even just like the site editor and the customizer. It's like the site editor, the customizer, Gutenberg, like, block editor itself and the WordPress interface, and then maybe two or three other plugins that overlay something else that wasn't done in the core way. Like and then you put like Beaver Builder or Divi on top of that, and it's like all sorts of like conflicting things. And I would love I love that there is like the idea of like this is how you should do WordPress, this is how you should do site editors, how you should do like page buildery stuff. Um, but it's like without like universal adoption, like we get in this weird like fractured place where people are doing all sorts of different things and then confused when things don't go together. And yeah, I don't have any solutions. I'm just like
No, I think you touched on some really good stuff. Where like in an ideal world, rather than having different interfaces, using blocks is using blocks. And there's friction when you're in the site editor that shows you enough that mental framework of like, I'm still using blocks, which feels really similar to when I'm writing a post, but now I can just build my site. And we're not quite there. And I mean, at the very beginning, I remember like 5.9 or like right before 5.9, we would allow not enough. It would be so easy to edit your site. There was like no friction, and we were having the opposite problem where it was like people were doing stuff without realizing the cascading impact. And so now we've started adding in more friction, and kind of, chipping away at that problem. And like also ideally, rather than adding a page builder on top, page builders can extend what's being done in core. So there is a familiarity. They're using the same components. And that's where like in an ideal world, we can kind of get there. We have to build those extension points and like make curating the editing experience easier for extenders. So if you're working with a client, you're like, I'm having a hard time with this. I want to hide all this stuff. It's really easy for you to do that. And right now, that's another area that I just, as we were talking, I was like, ooh, that's kind of an overlap in my mind
yeah,
too.
well, and I find it really interesting. I just installed a Drupal 10 site for the first time in, I don't know, a while, last week. And as soon as you install, I don't know how many of you have done this, probably maybe not very many. As soon as you install Drupal 10, you log in, you are given a page that looks exactly like the front page of your site. Like immediately it's right there. Like I don't have to do anything. And like I remember back in the olden days, like that was the dream of WordPress, right? That was the dream of Gutenberg and the site editors. Like you just go there and you just what you see is exactly what you get. That was the whole goal. That was like the mission statement of block editing. And that's just a thing. That's just a thing. I installed Drupal 10 and immediately I have, and I don't think it like, it cascades down for every thing. Drupal is super complex and whatever, but like that first experience of like I'm looking at a page, it says I have a logged in bar at the top that says you're logged in, and the page I'm looking at is the page that I would go to if I went to the front of my site, and that the only difference is it says that I'm logged in. And that's like, I mean, that's the first time experience that you know I wish we had.
Yeah, I hear you. Fabian.
Something that also kind of came to me again when Nick was telling that story is I think we're not thinking about context and user roles enough in how we're currently approaching things, because a lot of the issues that we're seeing in the site editor, I think in part are because we're kind of, and you all may disagree on this, but I feel like the site editor on purpose has a lot of the kind of has that full design potential, has that branch out to custom CSS, has that global sweeping update. And I don't think every single person on our team should have the admin access to kind of change the global header layout. And that kind of we do have that limit, kind of we do have that differentiation. Yes, you can only access the site editor if you're an admin, but I think that is the only differentiation that we're really making when it comes to blocks. Kind of either you have all the things or you have no, kind of just the very basics. And I would love us to explore some of that kind of user capability system a little more when it comes to blocks and experiences, because I do think just the context and the role of what you're trying to do and kind of what role you actually want to play in a project actually makes a huge difference to how you want the UI to work. And instead of kind of removing some of the complexity from the site editor, I think it makes sense for us to have more complex user flows in a pro tool that is the site editor for the actual admins of the site, but also not so complex flows for the people who are only writing content and want to focus on that. And kind of, that is just something that I think would help us. Or I've seen a couple of recent issues, and I'm happy to share them in the thread in a minute afterwards. But thinking of different user capabilities for some of the things we're working on, I think would also help some of the perception of these things.
Yeah, I agree. Same with opening up more access to things for classic themes. Like that's something I'm really excited about with 6.5 is the appearance tools and being able to add support for that. Because that's the other part about this. It's like right now it's all the block theme and kind of allowing access points for folks to explore safely. Kind of that's an overlap to me. I need to edit the post.
Yeah.
It's kind of listening problem. Matthias.
But I think that, like, just quickly to say that I think that point of is really a driving, it might not be like immediately evident, but it's a driving force for, I think, most of these features, like even the content only log, like the seed for that is really to be able to structure something around permissions and user roles. And that also goes to like some of the stuff that we're exploring now with the style variations for individual patterns, so that you can define essentially a more complex mesh of like what is available for the user if all of these other aspects are locked down, and you only can like choose between a few style presets and maybe modify the content of a few blocks. But doing it that in a way that is like fundamentally resilient at the attribute level of blocks, that it works in a way that any block builder can tap into that. So it's not just something that we like, you only can do it with core blocks and so forth. That is what I think leads to both like longer term processes for these, but also like some of the intermediary steps maybe feeling like what's the point of these things, what is it building up to, what is it going to unlock. But I think that to me the like unlocking all of those permission combinations is really sort of like the ultimate goal of like most of these primitives. Getting these primitives right, I think, means that you can build very sophisticated balances of like, based on what user role you are, just the right things are open up to you. And that is like inherently customizable by any site maintainer and owner.
Yeah, I agree. Brian, the tweet that started it all.
Thanks. I guess I'll just give a quick perspective of I work more from like the agency world. So I think the agency world is one side of things, but I understand that people have completely different use cases and there's all different people building WordPress sites. But I think what I've heard from people that work at other agencies and stuff is that last year there was this kind of sense that the site editor is phase 2 is not complete, but like there was a sense we're ready for phase 3. And so I know a lot of people that tried to use full site editing at the agency level, which was like, we're building multiple sites, repeatedly. We have workflows. We want to be able to control things and we want to build on top of core. And then the last few months has been a lot of people saying, well, I kind of regret doing that because I didn't realize all of the feature parity that I thought was implied is not there. So I thought I could use the core navigation block, but I kind of can't. And I thought that I could use some of this block locking stuff and the content locking and stuff. And then it was like, well, actually, I kind of can't. And I thought I could use patterns as a way to structure content, but in create block theme, it's a manual hoop jumping process just to put patterns in your theme. And there were all these like tiny, just little pressure points where it felt like, oh, okay. But so I think if there's a sense, there could be a sense that says site editing is maybe not ready for that workflow yet. And it's okay that we say it out loud. And there's a good sense that there's these 5 areas that we really know need to be solved, because agencies do a lot of websites and they do a lot of page builder websites, but there's a really big opportunity for them to invest in site editing and give you all of that feedback that everyone needs. But they're just not going to do it right now because they they've realized that the features just aren't there that they could get elsewhere. And so I'm super optimistic about outreach in general and about this idea that it really feels like people are listening. So I just want to say thank you just for having this, for opening this up. I think like it's just going to be really important to get the word out and get people who, you know, gave it a try last year and were kind of a little frustrated about it and feeling that it's not done, and to be able to come back and say, okay, we actually do realize this. And that's what I think people say when they mean like feature freeze, not like don't give us new features, but like, it are we ever going to be able to use the core navigation block? Because everybody I know writes custom navigation blocks. Are we going to be able to use these blocking things? Are we going to be able to do this cool stuff? Because I get that it's foundational APIs and things like the block binding API is so cool. So glad that you're doing it API first and not UI first. I think that's a great approach. But people, I think, want to know, when will it be safe to really trust these tools? And I think that's the conversation that people want to have.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. I want to just quickly say that there is an extensibility label in GitHub. So if you have issues that you'd like to have opened or want to dive in there, that's a great place to start for this. I had something else. My brain just completely emptied it out. Matthias, saw you about to
I
jump.
need to step out in like 5 minutes, but I
Yep,
quickly
please.
wanted to touch on the because I think this ties back to the beginning of the conversation also, like, oh, like can we stop like building new features in a sense? And I think that was essentially the thinking behind saying like, okay, phase two is coming to an end, in the sense of like we're not thinking about like big new features to still add to this. It doesn't mean that it's like done in like, yeah, we need to do all of this polish and so on. And a lot of the like the workflow things, like, yeah, they still like get represented by new code and there's new feature being built, but the surface area is mostly mapped out. That was sort of the intention behind that. I think like it's totally fine. I think depending on the use cases, I would say like, yeah, the site is absolutely ready for some of those. For some others, I think like, yeah, you might not have all the right tools, or you might need to like reach out to other plugins in the ecosystem to fill in the gaps. But it's like, yeah, I think part of that is also like how we communicate, how we do the marketing, like both internally to know the roadmap where we're heading, but also like what are like if you have this specific use case, what are the things that you should like keep in mind? Can you use documentation from that perspective? Because there's a lot of things to absorb and configure them properly and so forth. But yeah, I do hear like that feedback like very much.
Yeah,
Sorry, Aaron.
I just real quick want to add one thing. I think part of this too is also like how to use these tools and changing process, because everything I've heard is it's not only a technical change and adjusting to new technology, but it's changing process. So that's a huge thing that I am aware of and have been aware of for a long time. And I'm hopeful that we can have, if you're an agency and you've tried it and you found a process that works, please share it. Like I've tried to do plugs of that where we do have agencies who are using the site editor, and it's just a matter of getting them to pause and share their process. And I guess I need to do another round of banging on doors to see if we can get folks to talk about how they're actually using it and the change in process and not just the change in tech, because it's both right now. So, Aaron.
Um, Thinking about things that have like worked for WordPress as a project in the past, to solve some of these issues. I think about themes before WordPress 3.0, and how they were, sort of a neglected API. And one of the goals of 3.0 and doing the 2010 theme was to create, get the core team to be theme builders. And by, the core team, like really experiencing the pain points of building a theme, it was able to improve a lot of theme APIs. And like, granted, this is, approximately 1 billion years ago in WordPress time, but, I wonder if things like that, where like, if more of, core members of the Gutenberg team were, built a site. I know like when I got to work on the White House website, like Helen and I were finding all these edge cases where like we just wanted to, fix all of them. It was, nope, we are working on one site, but you find those things. And I think that maybe a project like that could really benefit WordPress and benefit the people building WordPress.
That's a great call up. I think like a lot of the people working tightly are already doing some of that. All the way from I think, for example, it's been really cool to see like designers being able to start like using to create a lot of the themes just entirely in the site editor. That has been a huge source of feedback loops because it's like again, they cannot patch some of the gaps with like just reaching out to code. So that has been like instrumental to drive a lot of the simplification. I think everyone working on it should try to do like build real sites, like with real people as well. I think that's a great call out. Even some of the default themes I think have been super useful. If you trace back like 2024, 2023, like they've been really like major drivers of ensuring that these things like make sense to users. And you can see the leaps between them as well. But yeah, I agree 100% on that.
If anyone wants a site to work on, Block Museum, come hang out. I will give you access. Peter.
Hey everyone. For those who don't know me, I am a meetup organizer. I see Eagle joined us too. He's also a meetup organizer. We're dealing with kind of the regular folk out there who are most of the users that too often in some of these conversations, I think their involvement is underestimated, their comments, and in fact, a lot of the you know the conversations about the challenges, aren't necessarily addressing what the DIYer, the one man shop, and so on, who are using these tools and then are presented with a new version that and in a while back you got some comments from me on looking at, and I think there was a conditional that says when you get a new release, if you're using a classic theme and you're telling me all about the things that may or may not work in my environment, it's confusing. When you go to the training and your environment doesn't work like that, and then you watch experts work in a situation where the experts are experiencing issues pretty much every time I go, and we frequent a lot of live streams and presentations. I know most of you hear in the call one way or the other. That needs to be respected and understood that there's this entire other way that, quite honestly, I imagine the vast majority of people are working in. I know that, but we're forgetting to communicate to those people who then get confused and then says, well, I'm just going to be over here, because we've got issues like, well, when is it ready for me? When is my experience going to be better versus, oh, I can't do the navigation, when are we paying attention to the fact that one of the core key things about WordPress was the separation of content from design, and then the work to put them together that now makes somebody go, oh, I just deleted a template, those types of things. So I just want to always make sure that we're paying attention to that. I would encourage the folks on this call to join some of the meetups, to be there and kind of hear from regular folk, and then say, okay, let's pay attention. I know you do, but I don't hear enough in some these conversations are about designers and agencies and things like that. But for a lot of us, we've got a beta product that's being developed, while we're using it. We never know when to jump on the train and go, okay, now it's ready for us. So thanks for listening.
Yeah, and thanks for your continued feedback around that. It's something I've thought about with like when I'm working on a source of truth, of clarifying, this is for block themes, this is for classic themes. That's definitely something that's I think our discussions have prompted me to think more about and be more critical about. And I agree on meetups. It's actually been invaluable. Learn runs online workshops as well, which are great to join. I definitely encourage folks to jump in there. Colin.
I really need to run, but I just want to say I really appreciate everyone like showing up, like a lot of like good. Hope we can do another one. Like this is a great conversation.
I think we should pick an area, but thanks for joining, Matthias.
Yeah, of course. Bye.
Thank you. Also, it's kind of so awesome to see all the faces that have helped me through GitHub. So that's it's been really nice. I'm a agency owner and engineer, and we are experiencing quite a few problems with workflow changes. And we're we adapt quite a bit. It's actually one of our values. We know we got to do that. So we kind of feel like we're rolling with it. But one of the things that's really been difficult is changing our clients' um, opinions of WordPress. And kind of what I mean by that is right now we're kind of sacrificing the ability to lock down brand standards and things along those lines using the full site editor. We're also really having to shift our Git workflows and what used to work to where we were very heavy ACF focused, ACF blocks, or pretty much everything was developed, code went up, content came down in our workflows. And now we're really kind of trying to figure out where and how do we use Git as we're building highly customized sites for our clients. And basically, the second we push code and then somebody goes and changes something in the site editor, we're out of sync again. And so we can't give that assurance for the client that something's not going to be overwritten. And we've been able to talk around it now. But as we deal with financial institutions, higher education, concerns they're bringing up, and things that are holding them back and saying, well, what if we don't go Gutenberg yet? And I don't like hearing that because I mean we have fully embraced full site editing at our company and are definitely tackling a lot of the issues head on. Like I think we actually had something 2 weeks ago. We built a feature and we're like, oh sweet, and then it was like the very next day it was a blog post on the developer thing of like, here's how you do it. And we're like, okay, cool. So it's moving quick, and we really appreciate that. But I think trying to come up with ways that we can reassure our clients that they're that do have these very important brand standards, accessibility standards that they have to meet. How can we continue to ensure that where we used to be able to with Git, now we're having to figure out new workflows for that.
Yeah, that's a great call, Nick. It seems like you're please, yeah. Do you want to jump in line?
Carolyn, do you mind if I jump in real quick? Just one real quick.
Go ahead. We are so short of time. We're actually over time.
Oh, sorry. Actually, well, you say your thing. And I'll respond to. I can respond to.
Well, I thank you, Colin. I also want to connect what Aaron said about developers creating themes and actually creating websites and seeing the pain points, and connect that to with what Colin said. So so on X or Twitter, there is a lot of feedback about the Gutenberg developers not being agency developers, not having experience from agencies. And I'm one of those. I have no experience from working with agencies or any of these kind of large projects. But what has been really eye-opening is that I needed to go back and look at the problems that have been, the tickets that have been open for the bundle themes, the classic bundle themes. And it's not until then when I sort of, step back from like, oh, I only want to do block themes. Block themes is my thing. When I started again looking back at, what the problems the classic themes are experiencing in the block editor, yeah, I'm starting to realize when people come to the Gutenberg databases and saying like, oh, we need to change the CSS specificity. We need to go back to using class names. You can't have all these inline styles. And I would encourage anyone who has the time who are contributing to the project to actually go and look at the CSS related issues for the bundle themes. These are not easy problems to solve. And of course, this is a different situation from if you're working with client with one custom theme that they're the only client that actually has that theme. You still have to keep up to date with all these changes. But when you're working on a bundle theme that has, well, not many of them has that many installs anymore of the classic themes, but let's say they have a couple of millions installs anyway. And we've been told that we cannot change the minimum required version. We have to be backwards compatible. It becomes so much more difficult because you can't break something on 5.6. You can't break something on 6.2 either. And yeah, it's becoming really tricky. I'm gonna stop now because of time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you as
And can I
always.
say one more thing?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so I want to talk quickly about the thing that was mentioned around like version control and Git and everything like that. That is a major issue, and I think that one of the best ways to address those major issues is to get a massive site like WordPress.org using block themes. And WordPress.org requires all content for the main site to be under version control, and this is a thing that is being run into. So right now, the site editor on WordPress.org works, but it doesn't, all the content that needs to get manually transferred, or they have a process to put that into patterns, which are then, stored in version control, and then those are linked to in templates. It is a very roundabout workflow. But just know that WordPress.org is encountering this, and then, as we'll need to come up with a better workflow in the future. But one of the things that we're trying to do is to get WordPress.org to use more of these things at a very high, very large traffic site to kind of test what is the best workflow for that sort of thing. So I just wanted to share that you're not alone. So
And how cool would it be to like learn from that and maybe
yeah,
do a study on it of like, here's how WordPress does it. Let's, like that's, I think if you're running into these things, running into these problems, like bring them up in the outreach channel and let's see what we can do to turn it into course material, developer blog posts, Hallway Hangout, whatever. Like there's a really nice self-fulfilling prophecy there. We can kind of like have find the solutions by talking about them and talking about the pain points too. So Eagle, I see you have your hand raised. So I want to make sure.
Yes.
Please.
Like Peter, I'm one of a group of people that hang out with each other in the WordPress meetup world, and we call our meetups help desk. So we talk to people with broken sites 2-3 times a week because we're in each other's groups. And one of the biggest things that I have seen, which is most frustrating to people, is the new full site editing paradigm shift in that the new full site editing way of dealing with home pages is people turn their themes, they make the blog template the homepage. And so if you work like normally where you create a homepage, you create a blog page, you go into your reading settings, you change the settings to home and blog. Now when you click on blog, the blog is now the homepage. What was the homepage? It's not an archive. If you look at the 2024 theme. Uh, and people try to make that work, and they just screw up the entire templating system because they don't know how to make that shift. And so if I create a homepage and I go to edit it and I look at the templates, in 2024 there's 3 templates for the homepage, but they're all page templates. They're not the block template. If you try to edit the blog template, there's 4 different patterns or 5 different patterns to make your homepage look that. But it's a whole paradigm shift. It's like people are like, why in the world is my blog template now my homepage? And how do I get an archive page of my post? There's not one in 2024 unless you go in and edit the blog template and learn that, oh, up in that upper right corner, there's a little thing that says, hey, I can change the pattern, which nobody ever finds. And being a developer for many years, it took myself and 4 or 5 other help desk meetup group guys to get together in a meeting by yourself and try to figure out why we couldn't fix these templates people were bringing to us that were broken because we didn't understand what they were doing. And we had to go in and understand how these theme or templates were put together. And once we understood that, then I could give people, oh yeah, you got to do this to fix it, and in some cases, we just had to just go in and delete their templates because they had screwed them up so bad and start over. Uh, and for me, like 2024, for me, I just go in and delete the blog template and just create the blog template archive like it should be, or like I think it should be. But new people don't know that, and they screw up the full site editing so bad that generally people in the help desk group say Stay away from full site editing. It's a mess. Use generate blocks, use Astra, use Knuts, use something that's not gonna uh, mess your head up. I'm sorry, this terminology. I'm trying to rush here. That's not going to be as big a problem, and you'll get better support because the full site editing is different depending on what theme you use, and it's different a different way of working with WordPress, and that's very confusing to people. And I don't know why that is. I've tried engaging in the Slack channels with the people in terms of like the table of contents block that's coming out. One of my frustrations is the table of contents only recognizes core blocks. It doesn't recognize any third-party blocks that use headings, right? Cadence, Spectra, all these other blocks that are heading blocks, generate blocks, heading line. The Spectra blocks, the Cadence blocks, table contents, they all recognize all headings, period. The WordPress core block that's coming out recognizes no other headings but core blocks. And in my conversation with them, it's like, well, why in the world would you want to do that? Well, if they would write their blocks the right way, then they would show up. I mean, I just got the attitude in the Slack channel that made me, well, why the hell am I here? They don't want to listen to me. So I quit. I quit the conversation because it was just an attack on my idea. Uh, so two areas: better communication about how the full site editing works, some kind of onboarding process, documentation or something, and not so aggressive an attitude for people who have ideas in the Slack channel, because I literally got frustrated and left and haven't been back because I didn't like the way I was treated. I didn't like the concepts that were coming at me, that I was being, wrong about the thing, that it had to be done the core way or it wasn't worth doing anyway. I don't know. It was a very frustrating experience for me. And I've been doing this a long time, and I'm in the trenches with the people every week trying to work, and I tell people full site editing is the thing to do. The Glock editor is the thing to do. I'm one of the biggest supporters out there. Peter will tell you. I'm in the build mode on Fridays. I'm there trying to help and trying to learn, and it's been a frustrating process for me. So I'll just shut up at that point.
No, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm really, I can't speak on behalf of everyone, but I'm personally sorry that that's your experience. I've definitely entered communities where that has happened to me, and it makes it really hard to engage. And I can see where going forward, you might be less likely to. And if it's helpful, like please, I'm at Anzazu in Slack. I might not respond like instantly. I try to disconnect as much as I connect, but I would love to help kind of keep
I know who you are, and I know you're one of the good guys. So
yeah.
So is Nick. Nick's one of
Yeah,
my heroes.
please keep engaging, and please, like, thank you for also the work that you're doing to help folks. And like, I think you're touching on some really important stuff that we see. I work for Automatic, and so I talk a lot with WordPress.com folks, and that's a huge area that comes up. What is the
Right.
homepage? Is it a page? Is it a template? Is it both? What's the ideal? Where are we headed? Like, it's why aren't the reading settings exposed in the site editor? Like, it's a whole thing, and you're touching on it perfectly. And some of it is maybe we need to explain the trade-offs and how block themes are made for block themers. So whenever they're making a theme, they can understand how they might need to onboard their users. Like there's a lot there that I think we need to improve, that you beautifully touched on. Like you're 100%. It's something I see all over the place, have seen since the beginning. And I do want to wrap up, Peter, but I want to give you a second to chime in real quick, just because I want to be cognizant of people's time. And this has gone over by almost 15 minutes. So
no, I understand that, and I think what we're trying to say, for one thing, is that be very, very wary of the all engrossed echo chamber of how WordPress is, when in fact, and whatever the numbers are, and one of my biggest frustrations is I'm kind of a numbers guy in some regard, right? So how many people, and if we go by what little information appears to be out there, Jamie Marsland has kind of shared some of the things where 2% of users are using block themes, 98 are using classic themes, and all the conversation, you get into these conversations where it's just like, well, the right way is to do it this way. And it's like, that's 2% of the population. It just needs to be respected. It just needs to be kept in mind. It just need, kind of put it on a sticky when somebody comes in, and instead of just dismissing, which happens, not all the time, not everybody, but it's just so important to keep that in mind so that we can all continue to be on board and know when to say, hey, you know what? You might not need a block theme, but the editor right now, which Eagle and I both say, fantastic. I can't go back to a page builder now. So just, we are advocates. We are DIY advocates. So I think it's important to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. And just really appreciate you all being here and sharing that perspective, especially considering some of the experiences that have happened. That's definitely not what we're aiming for. And I fear disengagement more than anything else. I really, really appreciate when people take the time to engage. And what you're talking about with gradual adoption was a part of phase 2, is still something that's on the minds and something we need to do better. And also, I think you're totally right. We do need to think about the different ways people want to experience WordPress. So I do want to wrap up, and I want to just remind folks, like, these are the hardest problems that I could come up with. This is like, I am deep in this. I've been deep in this for years, since the beginning of the site editor, and this is the stuff that I'm seeing. I do need to edit the post to add in something based on this conversation, but I just want to call that out as like, thank you for engaging in the hardest stuff. And I think we should follow up with a hallway hangout that maybe dives into just one of these areas, and we talk about, there is work in progress for all this stuff too. I did not do a good job of saying that, but there is work in progress. There is stuff being noodled on. So have hope, and thank you all for showing up and engaging so beautifully. It really makes me happy that we have folks who engage. So thank you.